Hi, I'm Anna. Welcome back to Books on the Go. As promised, this is a coffee and a catch-up sort of video. It's a March wrap-up, but it's so belated that I don't think I'll go through everything I read in March, but just to update on the month that was, because I was too busy to film. So it just flew by. But in March in Adelaide, we had Adelaide Writers Week. And for our podcast, Books on the Go, we were lucky enough to interview some authors who were here for Writers Week. And I'll tell you about some of the highlights from that. That was during the sort of day, and at the same time the Adelaide Festival was on, so I was out for 17 nights in a row going to festival and fringe shows, which is I just don't have the stamina anymore, so I exhausted myself, but in a fun way. And I also was in Sydney for a Room to Read wine gala, which Room to Read is the charity that I support that focuses on children's literacy in the developing world. It's a fantastic organisation, and their Sydney wine gala is the big event of the year for Australia. They also do it in New York, London, Hong Kong, Singapore and elsewhere, but it's such a fun night. So we had a weekend in Sydney, and I then went to Melbourne for a social media workshop at the Digital Picnic, which I really highly recommend if you do anything to do with social media, and if you live in Australia. They do workshops in other cities, but I loved going to Melbourne for it because I think if you get away from home to do those things, it sometimes helps you focus a bit better. And then I got sick with influenza A, so I lost a week after all of that. But I'm back now. So that was the month of March. I thought I would just talk about some of the highlights in terms of reading and a little update on what I'm reading now. So one of the big discoveries for me, and I don't know if I've talked about it on the channel before, is Preti Taneja and her book We That Are Young. So I can't remember if I mentioned this earlier, but we loved this book. Amanda and I read it, and we had the chance to meet Preti and interview her for the podcast, and she was just delightful. She's super intelligent, but the book is just such a fun read. It's a modern day King Lear set in India, and I haven't actually read King Lear, but if you had, you would get even more out of it. But even as it was, I was just able to enjoy it, and you can read it as a Bollywood saga at one level, which is just a really fun, high energy, beautifully written saga set in India, and you fully immerse yourself in the country and the people and the disparity between wealth and poverty, and the crazy lifestyle of this super rich family, which is based on a real life family in India. And on the other hand, there are lots and lots of layers and references that she weaves in, but never in a heavy-handed way. They're just there if you look for them and if you recognise them. So Dante's 9 Circles of Hell, you could find that in the section where she's in the one of the characters is in the dump, and there are sort of 9 areas of the dump, and if you're looking for it, you can find these other layers, but it reads beautifully without even knowing that she's doing that. So and the King Lear is an example of that, because she told us that she did really, that King Lear was a huge inspiration for her, and she loves the play, the language and the structure, and she's really been inspired by that for the book. So if you're familiar with King Lear, you'll get even more out of this. And I think we all, by osmosis, we sort of know what King Lear is about, but I haven't read it, so I didn't quite know what was coming. I knew that it might not end well, but it was just a really, really good read. Quite a long one. So it's something to just immerse yourself in and perhaps take on holiday or just devote a week or two to it and really enjoy it. So that was a big discovery for us, We That Are Young by Preti, Taneja, and it's being adapted into a television series, I think in India, and by the producers of Narcos, I believe. So that'll be one to look out for. So that was really fun. Another highlight was a book that had been on my radar, and I'm so glad I finally got to read it, The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. And I had a chance to sit down with Rebecca and had a really wonderful chat about books, about The Great Believers and podcasts. And Rebecca is starting her own podcast called Drinking About Writing. So that should be, I think she said May, so that should be launching soon. So I'm looking forward to that. So you will know The Great Believers is set in Chicago during the AIDS crisis and also partly set in Paris in modern times. But a lot of the story unfolds in the 1980s, and it follows one character, Yale, and his group of friends, and some of them who die from AIDS or become sick. And it's very moving, beautifully written, and what I loved about this was I really felt like the characters were real and felt like I was really hanging out with them and spending time with them, and just in a really enjoyable way, like having a new circle of friends. And of course the Chicago itself is evoked really well, so it was like taking a trip to that city, even though obviously the story is quite sad, but there's humour in it as well, and she just has a wonderful natural writing style. So I really was moved by this book, The Great Believers. Loved chatting with Rebecca about it, and so I recommend this one. And then another wonderful Adelaide Writers' Week recommendation was How We Disappeared by Jing-Jing Lee. Jo Dyer, the director of Adelaide Writers' Week, recommended this to us, and I'm so glad she did, because I may not have picked it up. I hadn't heard of Jing-Jing Lee, haven't seen it on BookTube, may not have known about it if Jo hadn't told us about it. It's a story of Wang Di, who is living in Singapore as an older woman, but it goes back in time to World War II during the Japanese occupation of Singapore, and she's taken as a sex slave basically, and to work in a Japanese military brothel during World War II. So she survives that, and we do see her in sort of modern times as an old woman who's just lost her husband. Then we also meet Kevin, who's a 12-year-old boy, and he's sitting with his grandmother who's very ill, and she confesses something to him, and it opens up this mystery that he has to solve. So he's on a quest, and also in Singapore, and we follow him and meet his family, and he and Wang Di are just wonderful characters. They're both outsiders, so Kevin has the kind of Coke bottle glasses, and Wang Di is an outsider in her community as well. You know, she collects old newspapers and things like that, but they're really resilient, endearing characters, and I love the way Jing-Jing Lee writes. It's very clean, and the scenes are very clearly evoked. You really feel like you're there, and it's just that nice sense of being told a story. So I really enjoyed this one, and we've just done it on the podcast. So that's our most recent episode on Books on the Go. And yeah, just a great discovery from Adelaide Writers' Week. So that's How We Disappeared. And an update, because last time we were talking about the Stella Prize and the Erratics was the winner. So I nearly tipped it. I didn't quite feel confident to tip it outright, but I was so happy that this won. The Erratics by Vicki Laveau-Harvie. So this is her memoir of going back to Canada. She lives in Sydney, but she's originally Canadian, and she went back to see her parents, but she was estranged from her parents and she hadn't really seen them for 20 years. And her mother broke her hip and went to hospital. So Vicki went back with her sister who lives in Canada and basically found that their father had been starved and isolated in their house, and decided that this was a chance to sort of rescue him while their mother was in hospital. So their mother is a real character and just quite extraordinary. So these are, like, you couldn't make this up, but it's quite a unique story, but I think it will resonate widely because it's a story about family and dealing with dysfunctional families or difficult parents, or caring for parents as they get older, and all of those things come into it. But it's she has a really good sense of humour. I did speak about it in my other video, so I shouldn't go on and on, but so happy this won. And I don't know, in Australia it is now being reprinted and very much available, but I don't know internationally how easy it is to get this. I did see someone on Twitter saying they were having trouble, was it Jacqueline? Saying they were having trouble tracking it down. So hopefully it will be published beyond Australia. That's the Erratics. And then an update. I think I'll do a video on the Women's Prize because the shortlist is being announced on the 29th of April. And I have ended up reading quite a bit of the long list, not the whole long list, but quite a few books from it. So I might be able to do like a shortlist prediction video. Two that we've done recently on the podcast, Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss, which we loved. I think Annie and I read this and we both just thought it was the perfect small novel. It's a real gem. It's not, it's not long. It's set in the north of England, and it's a family where the father is obsessed with experiential archaeology and living as they did in the Iron Age. And so he's, quite an unusual character, and also quite violent and not a very nice man within the family. And it's told from the point of view of his daughter, who's about 15, I think, and they're living in these huts with a professor from the university who's come up with 3 of his students who are doing it as part of an archaeology course. And so you get the interplay between these relatively normal, not that we like to use the word normal, but more balanced people, and then her father, who is a bit obsessive. It's all told through her point of view, but it opens up all these issues about it because he's obsessed with the idea of getting back to being British with no outsiders, but purely what he thinks in his mind is purely British. So to me, that opened up all these questions about Brexit and the idea that there's that element of people who voted for Brexit who think that, England should go back to, just the English. But then you look back in time and think, well, Romans were there 2,000 years ago, and it's always had this element of being European. So to me, that was really interesting, but that's not spelt out. That's just sort of what it made me think about. And there are lots and lots of other issues and themes in the book, even for that size. She has a great writing style. It's very crisp, very dry, as in, quite dry humour. And she does a lot with just a few sentences. So she evokes these characters really strongly, just with a few lines here and there, without over labouring, that the father's like this or the mother's doing this. Just with one or two scenes, you get a really good sense of who they are. So Ghost Wall, I really, really enjoyed, and I think it's a really strong book, and it does everything that it sets out to do. So perfectly executed. And this one I hope will be on the shortlist, but I'll do, I think, a separate shortlist video. Yes, so then Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. And Annie and I are meeting tomorrow to discuss this for the podcast. So I may not say much more now. I've got a lot of flags here. I didn't like this, and I really wanted to, because Valeria Luiselli is an author I've been really interested in and someone I thought I would love her work. And she's very intelligent and a really interesting writer, but this book I just didn't get on with. So I might save that discussion for the next video about the Women's Prize shortlist. But yes, that's coming up on the podcast. I'm dying to know what Annie thought of it. So stay tuned for that one. That's Lost Children Archive. And that brings us sort of up to date. So I think I'll do a Women's Prize shortlist predictions video, and I'll do another April update soon as well. Love to know what you're reading, and if you've got any tips for the Women's Prize and anything else that you're reading at the moment. So let me know in the comments, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.